This is CNN Breaking News.
I'm Brianna Keeler. Wolf Blitzer is on assignment. You're in the Situation Room, and we're following multiple breaking stories, including a tense situation in Illinois where officials say at least 4 officers and multiple civilians have been struck by gunfire in a manufacturing business in Aurora. This is about 40 miles from Chicago. Nearby schools are on lockdown. Federal agents are responding as well. A hospital spokeswoman says multiple patients are coming in, although there is no exact word at this point on the numbers or their conditions. I want to bring in CNN crime and justice reporter Shimon Prokupez. You've been talking to your sources. What are they telling you?
Right. And like you said, Brandon, so we have 4 officers that have been injured, several civilians inside this facility that have been injured from gunfire. We don't yet know exactly how many of these people, how many civilians were injured. And most importantly is we don't know their condition. We have not been able to confirm the condition of the gunman. At this point, it's fair to say that law enforcement is treating this as a workplace violence. They do have witnesses. It was a person who was inside there who spoke to one of our affiliates, said that he recognized the shooter as a co-worker. And right now, it just appears that police are working this as a crime scene. They do believe they have it contained, that there are no other shooters, that there are no other threats at this point. And as you can see there are a lot of ambulances on the scene. We have not seen any ambulances leave the scene. There are police that are standing by. And essentially now we're waiting for more information from the police. But the good news is, at least in part, is that the police have this under control. The big question is now is the motive, what happened here, and the number of people who have been injured.
Evan Perez, you've been talking to your sources. What are you learning?
Well, one of the things that the police are doing right now is going over, making sure they can making sure that there's no other dangers at the scene of this crime. It appears to be a workplace shooting, as Shimon mentioned. But one of the things they're going to start doing now is going through, any surveillance camera footage to see exactly how this happened. Look, this shooter had the element of surprise, right? The officers appear to have responded to the calls for emergency help, and that's where the injuries appear to have happened. And so he or she, the shooter, would have had free reign for an extended period of time. You have to imagine. So it's not clear exactly how this all went down. And again, as Shimon said, one of the things that they try to figure out later on is the motive. But you have to think that this shooter could have harmed a lot of people by the time the officers were able to respond. At this point, from talking to the federal law enforcement people who have responded, they're still trying to get their hands around the idea of, like, if there's anything else that they have to watch for, booby traps, for instance, things that this person, especially because if this person knew this workplace, they could have done ahead of time, just to harm people in other ways. So again, it takes a little while for law enforcement to go through, it appears to be a very large facility. It takes a while for you to go through the facility of this size to make sure that there are no other dangers. And I think that's one of the reasons why the press conference is a little delayed right now.
And one of the things I wanted to point out is that you have 4 officers that have been injured here. At least some of them obviously have been shot. So there does appear to have been a gun battle between the shooter, the suspect here, and the police. And to have this number of officers injured in one kind of scene tells you something about what they face. And I think Evan brings out the good point. It's the element of surprise. They were responding for a call of shots fired. They go in, they intercept the shooter. There appears to have been a gun battle, and that's how the officers were injured. We don't know the condition of the shooter. We've not been able to confirm that. But there does appear to have been at least some kind of substantial gun battle here.
This is the ultimate of soft targets, right? This is a workplace. This is not a place where you expect for something like this to happen, even though, obviously these things happen from time to time in the United States. And so
especially if it's an insider
If it's
attack.
an insider, it's somebody who you expect to be or have access to a facility like this. So even if you have armed security guards, it's not something that immediately jumps out at you.
Let's bring in Josh Campbell, former FBI supervisory special agent. He's our CNN law enforcement analyst. I know that you have been talking to sources. I also know that you have trained for situations like this. What kind of training goes into that as you look at the kind of injuries or number of injuries that we're looking at from these police officers?
Well, we're going to see 2 aspects of the response here. First of all, there's the tactical training that goes in when an officer, whether state, federal, local, responding to potential violent scene. Obviously, they're going to approach that as though that there's a threat, And we've seen reportings of the subject that has been interdicted at this point, so that threat no longer remains. But there could be others. So you see law enforcement officers continuing to remain in location. What we don't see behind the scenes inside that building are the officers that are clearing that location. Now, there are other officers that will show up with specialties in evidence collection, and that will be the second wave. Once they have confidence that there's no longer a threat in this building, that there are no additional injuries, people that perhaps need to be transported to local hospitals, then they'll go through and look at for evidence. For example, shell casings, other things that the shooter may have left behind if he or she had a cell phone, for example. Again, they'll do this massive search of that facility as part of this investigation. And then the other aspect is what's going on with the shooter, him or herself. Now, we haven't confirmed that the person, we heard reports from law enforcement officers that the person is no longer a threat. They use the word apprehended. That doesn't mean that this person is currently in a position to talk to law enforcement officers. We haven't actually heard that this person, is still alive. So that will be those will be details that we need from law enforcement officers. If they are able to interview this person, they'll gather potentially important information. If this person isn't in a position to speak with them, then they'll obviously be digging into this person's past, the social media, the residences. We can expect them to be executing search warrants at the residence. Bottom line, this is going to be a very complex investigation. This is going to last a long time, both on the scene, what we're seeing, and then what's happening behind the scenes, Brianna.
Josh, when we have this description from someone who told our affiliate WLS that the gunman was carrying a pistol equipped with a green laser, pistol being the word that person described it as. So just keeping that in mind, not exactly sure if they're familiar with gun vernacular, but this is the person who said that they recognize this as their coworker. That a weapon with a green laser, what does that tell you?
So it tells me that this is a person who at least is familiar with firearms. I mean, this would be a type of device that is affixed to a firearm in order to improve the accuracy of shooting. And although it's true that a layperson could gather this type of device and attach it and affix it to a pistol, that's possible as well. But the one thing I think we have to keep in mind, and I'm always very conservative in these types of situations when we don't know information. We've only heard from one specific witness who told one of our affiliates that he recognized the person. Now, this isn't to, diminish from what this person adds, the value as far as what's going on inside. But with that said, I've talked to witnesses, I've responded to incidents where you have people that are in an emergent situation. There are stress hormones that are coursing through their veins. They have tunnel vision. Again, people will see things that may not actually track with what actually took place. As Evan mentioned, they'll compare that to surveillance footage and the like in order to determine what happened. So again, I'm not diminishing what the person's saying. I'm saying until we hear from more witnesses, until we hear from the authorities, it's really hard to figure out the large scope of what we're dealing with.
It's a really good word of caution. And Shimon, what is the expectation about how long this, you said obviously, and Evan, you pointed this out, authorities will be taking their time. What is the time frame here?
It's a good question. I don't know what the time frame is here. I think law enforcement is still trying to gather everything. It's a pretty big scene, probably. We don't know that he stayed in one area or the shooter stayed in one area.
Because it's a manufacturing facility,
there's some talk that it may have been a steel facility of some kind. It's not certain. It looks rather large.
Right, and in the initial reports came from one address, and so it's not even clear whether the shooter stayed in one workplace, whether he went to an adjoining one, and that's where he was confronted. Again, there's a lot of mixed information here. Some of it is not altogether clear from the initial reports, and this always happens, as you know, from covering these things over the years. Some of the initial witness accounts are always a little off because people are under stress. They're fleeing the scene, they're trying to save their lives, and they're calling the police, telling them what they're seeing in front of them. And so it's not exactly clear that where this exactly began and where it ended, but it is clear that the police are trying to get a handle on both, whatever the location there is, to make sure that there's no other dangers at this point.
Yeah, and I think for us, and I think the big thing for the police there is making sure that they have a handle on the number of victims. Let's say if there are other victims that are inside that we have not heard about yet, there could be people who have died. We don't have that confirmed or anything, but this could be what they're dealing with. And we always see these in these situations. You have these shootings, and it takes sometimes a while for the police to gather all the information. And part of it is also they have to make sure that they let families know what's going on here, right? And you have victims that have been taken to hospitals and making sure that they have everything in order before they tell us exactly what happened.